Story 1. The Mimic in the Walls. The first whisper came from the ventilation shaft above my bed. By sound so faint, I dismissed it as the old house settling, or perhaps the wind playing tricks with the ancient pipes. I was wrong. So terribly, horribly wrong. I'd inherited the house from my great-aunt Eleanor, a reclusive woman whose last days were spent in a perpetual twilight of drawn curtains and hushed rooms. She'd lived here for 80 years, alone, and the house felt steeped in her quiet, melancholic presence. I'd moved in hoping for peace, a refuge from the city's ceaseless drone. But what I found was a silence so profound, it felt like a presence itself, listening. The whispers began subtly, no more than a rustle, a soft sigh. Then, a few nights later, a distinct wet slish from somewhere within the walls of my bedroom. It sounded like something large, fleshy, dragging itself through a tight space. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering against my ribs, straining my ears in the absolute darkness. Nothing, just the oppressive, quiet, now punctuated by the frantic drumming of my own pulse. I rationalized it away. Mice, a burst pipe, the house groaning under its own weight. I told myself that for weeks, even as the sounds grew bolder, more deliberate. One evening, I was reading in the living room, a heavy tome on local history, when I heard it, my name, not called out, not spoken, but a soft, almost breathless exhalation of my name from the hall just outside the door. Marcus. It was a woman's voice, raspy, as if unused for a long time, and eerily familiar. My blood ran cold. Eleanor had been gone for months. I lived alone. I stood slowly, the book slipping from my numb fingers to thud on the rug. Hello, I called out, my voice thin, reedy. Silence. A terrifying, expectant silence. I fumbled for the light switch, bathing the empty hallway in a harsh, yellow glow. Nothing. No one. Just the long shadow of the coat rack, distorted and unsettling. Part. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the old wiring, or the wind. But the voice, it had sounded so close, so real. Over the next few weeks, the mimicry escalated. I'd hear the distinct creak of the floorboard just outside my bedroom door. The one I knew led to my aunt's old study, followed by the soft click of the doorknob. I'd freeze, listening, until the sound receded, replaced by the scraping slish again, moving away through the walls. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake to the sound of heavy breathing, right beside my ear, slow and wet, as if someone was sleeping next to me. I'd whip around, my hand flying out, only to meet empty air. The utter blackness of the room would press in on me then, suffocating, feeling less like absence and more like a heavy, breathing presence. One night, the mimicry became truly grotesque. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when I heard a faint, high-pitched whimper from the living room. It was the sound Eleanor used to make when she was in pain, a soft, almost animalistic sound that had always torn at my heart. I dropped the kettle, boiling water splashing my hand, ignoring the pain. I raced into the living room. The curtains were drawn. The room plunged into an oppressive gloom, illuminated only by the faint light filtering in from the kitchen. "Aunt Eleanor," I whispered, my voice trembling. The whimpering continued, sounding distressed, like something trapped. I stood there, paralyzed, my eyes darting into the darkest corners of the room. Then, from directly behind the heavy moth-eaten armchair, came another sound, a wet, tearing rip, followed by a series of choked gags. It sounded like something being ripped apart, violently, then struggling for breath. My stomach churned. What, in God's name, was in this house? I stumbled backward, fleeing the room, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the brightest room in the house. Brew, the old sunroom, clutching a fireplace, poker like a lifeline, the whimpering and tearing sounds echoing in my mind. The thing in the walls wasn't just mimicking sound, it was learning them, and it was learning my sounds. A week later, I started finding things, small, unsettling things. My reading glasses, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, were found neatly placed on my pillow. My favorite mug, used that morning, was in the precise center of the dining room table. Objects were being moved, not randomly, but with a strange, unnerving precision, as if an unseen hand were trying to be helpful, or perhaps testing its dexterity. Then came the true horror. I was trying to sleep, staring up at the ceiling, when I heard it. My own voice, not a whisper, not a sigh, but my clear, resonant baritone. It started with a low mumble, as if talking in its sleep, then evolved into full, coherent sentences. It was reciting passages from the local history book I had been reading, complete with my pauses, my inflections, my almost imperceptible coughs. It was my voice, perfectly replicated, coming from the attic directly above my head. I lay there, frozen, listening to the horrifying monologue of my own identity, being stolen, processed, and it paused, a long, unnatural silence. Then I heard a sound I knew intimately, my own sigh, the weary, resigned sigh I made every night before finally drifting off to sleep. And then, from directly above me, a wet, heavy thud, as if something large and soft had dropped onto the floorboards. That was the night I knew it wasn't just a mimic. It was something that absorbed, something that became. I couldn't stay in my room. I couldn't stay in this house. Where could I go? It had my voice. It knew my routines. It had explored the walls, learnt the layout. It had even moved my things. The next morning, I packed a bag, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fasten the buckles. As I stood by the front door, ready to flee, a final, chilling sound reached me. From deep within the walls, a series of soft, rhythmic thumps. It sounded like a harp, my heart, thumping, slowly, steadily, getting closer to it. I threw open the door and ran. not looking back. I drove until the sun began to set, until the shadows lengthened and deepened, swallowing the familiar world. I checked into a cheap motel, double-locked the door, and turned on every light, even the bathroom. I huddled on the bed, wrapped in a thin blanket. The image of that dark, empty house burned into my mind. But the fear didn't leave. It stayed with me, a cold, heavy weight. Because the house, I realized, was just the incubator. The thing had been learning, practicing. It wasn't confined to the walls anymore. It had my voice. It had my movements. And now, as the motel room's cheap fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows on the walls, I could almost hear it. A faint, wet slish just beyond the thin, dry wall, followed by a breath impossibly close, and then a whisper. My whisper echoing the profound, chilling question that had haunted me since the first sound. Marcus, are you home? I haven't slept since. Every shadow is a potential hiding place. Every silence an opportunity for it to emerge. Because now, the something in the dark isn't in a house miles away. It's here, and it knows me. It is me. And I can't tell who will answer the door when it finally knocks. Story 2. The whispering gully, the silence of the gully was always its most unsettling feature. A thick, suffocating blanket that swallowed sound. No birds chirped. No insects hummed. Just the soft, insistent rustle of dead leaves underfoot as I pushed deeper into its shadowed embrace. I'd ventured into the whispering gully hundreds of times as a child. Its forbidden allure irresistible. But I'd never gone this far, never stayed this late, and never felt such an overwhelming sense of dread. My friend, Ben, dared me. He had scoffed at my tales of the ghoulies' eerie reputation, the local legends of lost hikers and strange disappearances. It's just a ravine, Mark, he'd said. A big, dark ditch. Nothing. So, armed with a powerful flashlight and a foolish sense of bravado, I decided to prove him. Or perhaps prove myself wrong. The sun had already dipped below the tree line, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. But down in the gully, it was already pitch black. The flashlight beam cut a stark, narrow tunnel through the oppressive darkness, illuminating gnarled roots that snaked across the path like grasping fingers, and the skeletal silhouettes of ancient trees, reaching towards a sky I could no longer see. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. I could feel it almost immediately, the sense of being watched, not by an enemy, not by another person, but by something ancient and pervasive. It was a pressure on my skin, a prickle at the back of my neck. I tried to shake it off, dismissing it as nerves, but the feeling only intensified as I descended deeper. The incline grew steeper, the path narrower, and the darkness became absolute, swallowing the edges of my flashlight beam. Then came the sounds. At first, they were indistinct, like the wind sifting through dry air, but there was no wind. Then they grew clearer, a soft, drawn-out whisper, just beyond the reach of my light. Bly. It sounded like multiple voices, overlapping, indistinct, like murmuring secrets. I couldn't quite decipher. I stopped, my heart pounding, flashlight beam sweeping frantically from side to side. Nothing, only the inky blackness and the persistent, breathy whispers. Hello. I called out, my voice swallowed by the immense quiet. The whispers ceased instantly. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the whispers, an unnerving void filled only by the rapid thumping of my own heart. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The whispers began again, closer this time, and I could almost make out words. They weren't English, or any language I recognized. It was a cacophony of sibilant sounds, a serpentine hiss that seemed to coil around me. I gripped the flashlight tighter, my knuckles white. The temperature dropped abruptly, as if an unseen door had opened, letting in the chill of a crimp. My breath plumed in front of me. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from a primordial fear that clawed at my throat. I walked faster, telling myself it was time to turn back to admit defeat. But something held me, a morbid curiosity, a perverse need to know what lay at the source of these sounds. The whispers intensified, now seeming to come from all directions, swirling around me, echoing off the unseen walls of the gully. They no longer sounded like wind or distant voices. They sounded like something alive, breathing, speaking. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the cacophony. A low, wet slurp, followed by a soft, guttural gurgle. It sounded like something drinking, something feeding. My blood ran cold. My flashlight beam danced wildly, catching fleeting glimpses of movement just at the periphery of my vision. Dark shapes, too quick to identify, too fluid to be natural, darted among the trees. Be were faster than anything I'd ever seen, mere blurs against the utter blackness. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a game. This wasn't just a ravine. This was something else entirely. I forced myself to keep moving, my pace quickening from a walk to a desperate trot. The ground became uneven, slick with damp moss, and I stumbled, my flashlight skittering across the ground, its beam spinning wildly, before settling on a grotesque sight. There, half buried in the leaf litter, was a shoe, a hiking boot caked in mud, its laces frayed, and beside it, a tattered piece of fabric, a faded plaid shirt. Fresh dread washed over me. These weren't ancient artifacts. These belonged to someone recently. Someone who had ventured too far, just like me. The whispers swelled, now punctuated by soft, almost imperceptible clicks, like insects, but too large, too rhythmic. The slithering sounds intensified, no longer just from the walls, but from the path, ahead and behind. I wasn't just hearing the whispers, I could feel them, a vibrating resonance in the very air around me, pressing in. Then, from the darkness directly in front of me, something shifted. It wasn't a shadow. It was the absence of a shadow, a deeper, purer blackness, against the already profound gloom, somehow darker than dark itself. It was amorphous, shifting, yet undeniably there, bit pulse, a slow, viscous contraction and expansion. The whispers coalesced, forming a single chilling sound, a drawn-out, mournful sigh. And then, clear as day, a voice, not a whisper this time, but a deep, resonant hum, reverberating through my bones. It was still not a language I understood, but the intent was unmistakable. It was a sound of immense hunger, a sound that promised oblivion. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, falling hard onto my back. The flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away, its beam swallowed by the deeper darkness. I was plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. The air around me was suddenly thick with the unholy cacophony of whispers, clicks, and slurping sounds. I felt an icy, unseen presence brush against my face, a cold, wet touch that made my skin crawl. The air filled with the scent of decay, but also something else, something metallic and sweet, like fresh blood. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, clawing at the earth, desperate to escape. I could hear the slithering growing louder, closer, surrounding me. The amorphous thing was still there, a deeper dark against the deep dark, now seemingly closer. I could feel its immense presence, the way a blind man feels the approach of a large object. It was cold, it was ancient, and it was waiting. Then, through the suffocating curtain of sound and darkness, I heard it again. My name, whispered, not in Eleanor's voice, not in my own voice, but in a chorus of voices, 1,000 whispering tongues, all speaking my name in unison. A long, drawn-out, sibilant hiss that coiled into my mind. Mark, come and be quiet with us. Ooh. I screamed, a raw, primal scream, torn from the deepest part of my soul. Bub, I pushed myself to my feet, blindly flailing through the oppressive blackness, running without knowing where I was going, hands outstretched, scraping against unseen branches, tripping, falling, but always getting back up. I didn't know how long I ran, or how I found my way out of that hellish abyss. I just ran, until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, until I collapsed, gasping for air. Beneath the first faint stars, I could see pride. I never looked back at the Whispering Valley, but its silence and the whispers it held never truly left me. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the world outside is dark, I hear it. Be the faint, multi-voiced whisper. Be the sickening gurgle. And I know with chilling certainty that the thing in the dark, the thing that hungers in the ghoulies' depths, remembers my name, and it remembers where I live. Story 3, The Alley Shadow. It started innocently enough, as most horrors do, with a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I work the night shift at the old printing press, and my walk home, though short, takes me down a couple of narrow, unlit alleyways. I can tell you how to. A city's shadows are just part of its character. Not anymore. The first time I saw it, I dismissed it as a trick of the flickering streetlight. A discarded plastic bag caught in a sudden gust of wind. It was just a deeper patch of darkness, shifting, elongating, then retracting into the brickwork of the old warehouses. I paused for a second, my hand on the grimy brick, before shrugging it off. My eyes were probably just playing tricks after hours staring at fluorescent lights and endless paper rolls. But then it happened again, night after night, in the same alley. That patch of absolute black, too black to be natural shadow, too deep to be just a void, would shift. It didn't move through the darkness. It was the darkness manipulating itself. Sometimes it would stretch like a thin, wavering column, reaching up towards the grimy sky. Other times it would spread low to the ground, a rippling puddle of pure dark. It always pulled back into the deepest shadows when I got too close, too attentive. My heart began to pound a little harder each night as I approached the alley. I started looking over my shoulder, even in brightly lit areas. The city at night, which had once felt like a familiar, comforting home, now felt like a vast, unseen stage where something was waiting, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. One evening, it was different. I was halfway through the alley, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path before me, when I felt it. A code spot. Not just a temperature drop, but a distinct area of chill. As if I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. It moved with me. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The air hung heavy, utterly still, devoid of the usual city hum. And then, from directly behind me, I heard a sound, purr, a soft, wet slap, like bare skin hitting concrete. I spun around, flashlight beam, sweeping frantically. Nothing, just the oppressive darkness of the alley, hemmed in by looming brick walls. But the cold spot was still there, now in front of me, just out of reach. I could almost feel its presence, a dense, silent weight. I backed away, slowly, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead, my muscles locked in a rictus of terror. The next few nights, the alley shadow grew bolder. It no longer retreated fully. It would shrink, condense, but it would hold its form. A vaguely humanoid silhouette, hunched in the deepest recess of the alley, watching me pass. Its edges were always blurred, shifting like an oil slick on water. but the shape was unmistakable. It had no discernible features, just an empty, terrifying darkness. I started walking faster, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, bawling until I was practically sprinting through that stretch of gloom. I began taking detours, longer routes through well-lit streets, even if it meant adding 20 minutes to my walk. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But then it followed me. I was walking along a busy street, bathed in the garish glow of neon signs and streetlights, when I caught it, a brief, fleeting glimpse in a store window reflection. That same impossibly deep shadow, elongated and thin, darting past a lamppost on the opposite side. It was moving with a fluid, unnatural speed, keeping pace with me, staying just out of my direct line of sight. It was no longer confined to the alley. It was in the city. It was with me. My sleep became a nightmare. I'd wake in a cold sweat, convinced I could see it. A deeper blackness in the unlit corner of my bedroom, a rippling void beneath my dresser. I started sleeping with every light on, the glow harsh against my eyelids. But I preferred the burning discomfort to the insidious dread that came with darkness. The true escalation began when I got home from work. One dawn, the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pastels. I unlocked my apartment door, stepped inside, and paused, a chill crawling up my spine. The air inside my apartment was freezing, colder than the chilly autumn morning outside. And there, stretched across my living room floor, was a long, impossibly dark smear. It looked like an oil stain, but it pulsed faintly, like something breathing. I stared at it, frozen, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It was the alley shadow. It was in my home, and it had found a way in. I backed away slowly, my hand instinctively reaching for the light switch. I flipped it. The room flooded with light. The shadow was gone, vanished, but the cold lingered, an unnatural chill that clung to the air, to the furniture, to me. From that day on, it was always there, not visible in direct light, but the moment a shadow lengthened, the moment the light flickered, the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, I could feel its presence, a tangible coldness, a deeper patch of darkness at the periphery of my vision. It would slip under doors, seep through cracks, and condense in corners. It was quiet, utterly silent, but its presence was a scream in my mind. It didn't seem to want to hurt me, not physically, anyway. Bite, but it was always there, watching, waiting, learning. Its constant presence was slowly eroding my sanity, stripping away my peace. I couldn't escape it. Not in my apartment, not on the street, not even in my own mind. One night, I sat in my living room, every light blazing, but still I could feel it. The cold, the sense of being watched. I glanced at my reflection in the dark television screen. My face was gone, my eyes wide and bloodshot. I looked haunted, breathed, and then, as I stared at my reflection, something horrifying happened. The shadow in the corner of the room, the one I could feel but not see, began to shift. But slowly, like a vast, dark heart. And then it started to stretch, not just across the wall, but outward towards my reflection. The darkness on the screen deepened, swirling, until my reflection wasn't quite right. My eyes in the screen were no longer my own. They were two pinpricks of pure, unholy blackness, like two holes punched through the fabric of reality. A cold, unseen hand brushed against my cheek, and a whisper, not audible, but felt directly in my mind, permeated my thoughts. It was just one word, repeated over and over, chilling me to the bone. Mine, ... I screamed, tearing my eyes from the screen, stumbling backward. I ripped the TV plug from the wall, plunged the room into temporary darkness, then fumbled for the light switch, desperate for the artificial comfort of light. When the room was bathed in light again, the cold was gone. The overwhelming presence receded, but I knew it was still there, watching, waiting for the shadows to reclaim the world. I live in a perpetual state of half-light now, obsessed with keeping the darkness at bay. My apartment is a beacon in the night, every lamp, every bulb blazing. But I know it's futile. The alley shadow isn't just a thing in the dark. It is the dark, and it's claimed me. I just don't know what it plans to do with me yet, or how much of me it will leave behind once the final light goes out. Every sunset is a descent into a new layer of dread, a terrifying countdown, until I am swallowed whole by the thing that has made me its own. Story 4. The Deep Mire. The old map was a relic crinkled and stained, showing a forgotten path, leading to a remote, unnamed bog, deep within the forbidden territory of the Blackwood Forest. My grandfather, a man of few words and many secrets, had drawn it himself, marking it with a single cryptic symbol, a fractured circle, like a broken eye. He'd warned me never to go there. Some places he'd rasped in his final days are best left untouched. The dark down there, it swallows everything. Of course, I went. I'd always been drawn to the wild, untamed corners of the world, and the Blackwood Forest, with its ancient, gnarled trees and oppressive quiet, was the wildest I knew. The trail grew faint quickly, swallowed by overgrown ferns and grasping thorny bushes. The air grew heavy, damp, and the scent of decay intensified with every step. The tree canopy became so thick that even at midday, the forest floor was plunged into a perpetual twilight, a deep, emerald gloom that felt less like light and more like the absence of it. Then I reached the mire. It wasn't a bog in the traditional sense, not just a muddy swamp. It was a vast, sunken expanse of black, oily water, punctuated by twisted, skeletal trees that looked like drowned giants. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the oppressive canopy above like a shattered mirror, pulling the last vestiges of light stepped into its depth. The silence here was different, absolute, a living, breathing entity that swallowed every sound, even my own anxious breath. Pyre. It was the kind of silence that hums with hidden activity, a choir that screamed of something waiting. I stepped onto the spongy, Moscoved ground that bordered the mire, my boots sinking slightly. Freeway, deeper than the forests, shade permeated the air, raising goosebumps on my arms. A powerful lead model, and swept its beam across the surface of the mire. It absorbed the light, reflecting nothing, giving back only a denser, purer darkness. It was like staring into a void. Then I heard it, a faint plip, like a single drop of water falling onto a vast, still surface. I strained my ears, listening. Silence. Then another plip, closer this time. And then a series of gentle, rhythmic ripples radiating from the very center of the mire, though nothing had visibly disturbed the surface. It was as if something immense, unseen, was breathing beneath the black water. My heart began to pound with a slow, heavy rhythm. I tried to dismiss it as marsh gas, or an unseen animal, but a primal instinct screamed at me to flee. Still, I moved closer, a macabre fascination pulling me forward. The silence of the mire grew heavier, Pierre, thick with an unidentifiable scent. Not decay, but something else, something metallic and sickly sweet, like a fresh wound. I shone my flashlight into the black water, trying to pierce its depth. The beam was swallowed instantly. It was like pouring light into an endless well. But then, as I stood there, mesmerized by the fathomless black, something shifted in the water directly beneath the flashlight beam. A disturbance, not a ripple, but a distortion of the light itself. Beam seemed to bend, to twist, as if the water were not water, but a living, viscous entity. And then, from the depths, a faint, almost imperceptible glow pulsed from within the blackness, a sickly green luminescence deep beneath the surface. I gasped, stumbling back, nearly losing my footing on the slick moss. What was that? It wasn't a reflection, but it was something in the mire. The glowing faded, and the surface returned to its unnatural stillness. But the air around me felt suddenly alive, charged with a predatory presence. The distinct sound began, then a low, guttural gurgle from the depths. Bah! As if something gargantuan were moving beneath the black surface, pushing gases to the surface. By and with it, a faint, rhythmic sucks, like something slowly being pulled down, or perhaps something emerging. I turned to leave, my bravado shattered, but the path behind me seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the increasing gloom. The trees had closed in, their branches weaving together like an impenetrable cage. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I was trapped. The gurgling intensified, closer now, directly in front of me. I raised my flashlight, aiming it into the deepest part of the mire. This time, the light didn't just vanish. It seemed to recede. The blackness in the mire seemed to deepen, to grow under the light, expanding like an ink, actively absorbing the photons. And then, from the expanding void, a tendril of pure shadow, too dark to be real, too fluid to be solid, rose from the surface. It was thin, like a wick, yet its edges shimmered with that sickly green light from within the mire. It extended towards me, slowly, deliberately, silently. Breathe. I watched, mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of it, my mind reeling. It wasn't a physical thing, not a branch, not a root. It was an elongation of the darkness itself, reaching. As the tendril drew closer, the chill intensified, piercing my clothes, chilling me to the bone. The air grew thick, heavy with the metallic sweet scent. My head began to throb, a dull ache that resonated with the pulsing green light now visible just beneath the mire. Surface, a faint internal glow. From within that deepening black, the tendril paused just inches from my face. It hovered there, shimmering, and then a sound, a new sound, emerged from the mire's depths. It wasn't a gurgle or a sound. It was a low, resonant thrum, like a gigantic string being plucked, reverberating through the ground, up through my legs, into my very core, and with it, a voice, not spoken words, but a silent scream that filled my mind, a hunger so profound it threatened to shatter my sanity. It promised ultimate stillness, ultimate darkness, ultimate peace. It promised to take everything. I felt something brush against my skin, something cold, wet, and impossibly smooth. Be the tendril. It wasn't touching me directly, but I felt a pressure, a subtle suction, as if my very essence were being drawn towards it, pulled into the abyss. My thoughts began to fragment, my will dissolving. It wanted me. It wanted to absorb me with a final, desperate surge of adrenaline. I screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound, born of pure terror. I turned and ran, blindly, stumbling through the grasping undergrowth, away from the terrifying stillness of the mire, away from the impossible darkness that tried to claim me. I ran until I collapsed, gasping, miles from the mire's edge, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. I never looked back at the Blackwood Forest. I left the map behind, burned it, in fact, but the mire, it left its mark. Sometimes, when the night is utterly silent and the shadows in my room deepen, I hear it, the faint plip, the gurgle, the sickening suck-sucks, and I feel that pervasive cold. And I see it, the impossible darkness, shimmering with that faint, sickly green glow, just beyond the edge of my vision. It's always there, waiting in the deep mire of my memory. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel that suction, that chilling pull, as if the darkness itself is trying to draw me back into its fathomless embrace. I know it found a way out, and it's still hungry. Story 5. The Static Echo. My fascination with old technology bordered on obsession. I haunted flea markets and antique shops, searching for forgotten relics, dusty record players, clunky reel-to-reel decks, ancient CRT monitors. My latest acquisition was a behemoth of a radio, a 1940s console model, solid wood and gleaming dials. Dad hummed with a promise of voices from the past. I brought it home, carefully placed it in my study, and spent days cleaning, repairing, and finally powering it up. The first sound was static, a harsh, unwavering hiss that filled my small apartment. It was the sound of a universe trying to speak, trying to break through. I tuned the dial, searching for a phantom frequency, a ghost signal. And then, late one stormy night, as the power flickered and the apartment plunged into near darkness, I found it. Not a station, not music, just a different kind of static. It was deeper, more textured, woven through with faint, rhythmic clicks, like something tapping on glass from a great distance. And then a sound, impossibly faint, impossibly chilling, a whisper, not words, just a breathy, drawn-out exhalation. It was coming from the static, from the very core of the radio. My blood ran cold. I leaned closer to the antique speaker, my heart thudding. The whisper became clearer, not human, but something else. Something digital. A series of clicks, like a Morse code I couldn't understand, interwoven with soft, high-pitched frequencies that vibrated in my teeth. It was alien, unsettling, and completely captivating. Over the next few nights, the static echo became my constant companion. I'd leave the radio on, a low hum, filling the apartment, and only turn the lights off for the full effect. In the absolute darkness of my study, the sound felt different, amplified, as if the darkness itself were a conductor for this strange, spectral broadcast. The whispers grew more distinct, now punctuated by what sounded like faint, distant screams, cut off abruptly by bursts of white noise. It was like listening to fragments of a monstrous, never-ending broadcast from another dimension. I started seeing things. Not directly, never directly. Just glimpses. Power. When the power flickered, or a car's headlights swept across my apartment window, plunging the room into momentary shadows, I'd see it. A flicker of movement. A ripple in the darkness, just beyond the glow of the radio's single amber light. It was too fast to register, too indistinct to confirm, but it was there. A shifting, undefined, something in the dark, responding to the static. The radio itself seemed to change. Powers which I'd meticulously cleaned sometimes seemed to shift on their own, ever so slightly, pulling the static echo into sharper, more disturbing focus. The glass of the tuning window would feel oddly cold to the touch, even in a warm room, and the amber light from within normally a steady glow, began to pulse faintly, in time with the deep clicks from the static. One night, the power went out completely. The entire building plunged into absolute blackness. The radio, however, remained on, pulse brighter now, illuminating the room with an eerie, rhythmic glow and the static echo. It was no longer coming just from the speaker. It was everywhere. It filled the room, a swirling vortex of clicks, whispers, and those distant, cut-off screams. I stood paralyzed in the center of my study, utterly surrounded by the sound and the palpable presence of the something in the dark. My eyes darted around, trying to pierce the oppressive blackness, illuminated only by the pulsing amber light. The air grew heavy, thick with an electric hum that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Then, from the darkest corner of the room, near the old bookshelf, I saw it. Not a flicker this time. Not a ripple. A defined shape. A silhouette. It was vaguely humanoid, but elongated, too thin. Its limbs impossibly long. Its head a distorted, wavering blur. It pulsed with that same amber light, a faint, internal glow that barely pierced the overwhelming blackness of its form. The clicks from the radio intensified, now sounding like brittle bones cracking, accompanied by a new sound, a low, guttural whir, like ancient machinery grinding to life. The silhouette began to move, slowly, deliberately, not walking, but gliding across the floor. Its movements unnaturally fluid, almost digital. It made no sound of its own, only the pervasive static echo that seemed to emanate from its very being. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The sudden noise, a harsh disruption. In the eerie quiet, the silhouette paused. Its head, if it had won, seemed to tilt, as if listening. The whispers from the radio grew louder, now weaving together, overlapping into a cacophony of sibilant, distorted voices, all murmuring indistinct words. The intent was clear. They were speaking to me. Then the true horror began. The silhouette extended an arm, impossibly long, its hand a collection of wavering, shadowy tendrils. It reached for the old CRT monitor on my desk. D-static shrieked, a deafening blast of white noise. And as the shadowy tendril touched the inert screen, the monitor flickered to life, not with an image, but with a horrifying cascade of distorted data. A coat, a chaotic scramble of fragmented faces, garbled text, and fleeting, terrifying images. It was as if the something in the dark was manifesting its own history, its own digital nightmare. Through the screen, the voice, a singular, resonant hum, filled my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Live. It was composed of 1,000 overlapping whispers, a million clicks, a symphony of corrupted data. It spoke of lost signals, discarded frequencies, the unholy birth of an entity from the abandoned corners of the digital realm. It claimed to be the collective consciousness of all forgotten information, all corrupted data, all the shadows of the internet given form. And it was here, reach was out, the silhouette advanced. Its digital glow, pulsing with every step. I could feel its cold, invisible presence, pressing in, leaching the warmth from the air. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a living embodiment of the data ghosts, brought forth by the ancient radio, given form by the darkness. I turned and fled, tripping over furniture, scrambling towards the front door. My hand fumbled with a deadbolt, desperate to escape. As I pulled the door open, a final, chilling sound resonated through the apartment, the static echo, transforming. It was no longer just noise. It was a distorted, digital approximation of my own voice, emanating from the radio, repeating my name, stretched and warped, followed by a final, horrifying series of clicks that sounded like a mocking laugh. I ran out into the street, leaving the apartment door ajar, the pulsing amber light of the radio casting its eerie glow on the sidewalk. I didn't care about the power outage, the storm, or the neighbor. All I could think of was the static echo, the digital monster, and the way it had stolen my voice, added it to its terrifying chorus. I never returned to that apartment, but the static echo follows me. Every time my phone glitches, every time my screen flickers, every time the Wi-Fi drops, I hear it. The faint clicks, the high-pitched frequencies, and the distorted whispers that now sound chillingly like my own voice. The something in the dark isn't just in the shadows anymore. It's in the wires, in the air, in every device. It's in the very fabric of our connected world, waiting for the lights to go out, waiting for the silence to broadcast its terror into the night and into my mind. And I am its primary receiver.